Welcome to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast, presented by the Fantasy Football World Championship, home to the industry's most accurate rankings.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Full-Time Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Adam Krautwurst, and with me, as always, is Jack Colsheen, my partner in crime over here at the FFWC, drafting, making all this money. Hopefully, what is going on tonight, Jack?
Hey, these Wednesday nights are getting a whole lot easier now with waivers and all of that. When you spend all your money and you've got $0 in week 14, it's actually pretty nice. Went out to a Mexican restaurant with the wife, took it easy tonight, wasn't grinding waivers. It was what a treat.
Beautiful. I was talking to another high stakes, high volume guy yesterday on the phone, and he was like, "Hey, you got time for a call?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And I give him a time. He's like, "Yeah, that'll be fine because there's no more There's 90% of my waivers are non-existent now. So yeah, we can make that phone call work on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night." It's funny how we gotta work our lives around that too. But also other stuff. Like, listen, people don't understand if you don't, it's a podcast. It's easy. Yes, it's fun talking ball and all that stuff. But the work that goes into it, and then, I have a wife, I have kids. Like, I have a half-eaten piece of pizza next to me running in between soccer practice, basketball practice, or running in the door. Is your homework done? I'm getting out. Like, it's bananas, waivers and all that stuff. So you're getting into that world too now. So it's can be wild at times. So shout out to all the content creators out there who are doing this as much or more than we are. So
that's right.
For sure. Speaking of shout outs, we'll get our weekly JSN shout out of the way early. Jackson Smith and Jigba had a game last week. Could have been better. Could have been worse. But talk to us this week. What do we got? What do we hear from you, from the JSN Fan Club member here? Upcoming.
This is the JSN Corner segment, the recurring bit. But yeah. I feel like I'm actually, rather than begrudgingly or contractually obligated to talk about it, there's some excitement, at least for me this week. We talked about last week about Pete Carroll saying he wants to get JSN the ball more, and in week 13 they actually did it. He led Seattle in targets with 11, which was also ninth among all wide receivers in that week. 26.8% target share, which is fantastic, but probably most exciting as far as targets are concerned, 31% of Seattle's first read and design plays. So almost a third of the offense was game planned and dedicated to go to him, which tells me that this isn't a fluke. This is sticky. This is the game plan moving forward. And it's even more impressive that he did all this and he actually saw about 4% fewer routes than he would typically do. So he's getting the most out of what he has. You'd love to see the explosion of routes right away, but he's been targeted in week 13 on 39% of his routes run. That's 2% more than Puka Nacua and 2% behind CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek, and Nico. So he's right in that area of targets per route run where you're seeing they're really starting to use him when he's on the field. And when he got that opportunity, he actually did something with it. In my opinion, he started to eclipse Tyler Lockett. He turned those targets into leading the team for receptions. He was second in yards behind DK Metcalf and the explosion he had. His yards per route run, 2.21 compared to only 1.34 for Lockett. And I think probably most interestingly, between the two of them, JSN and Lockett, if you look at yards after contact per reception, 2.87 for JSN versus 0.6 for Lockett. So essentially Tyler Lockett doing his best Zach Ertz impersonation, just basically as soon as he gets contact, falling over with the ball. Where, you've got JSN, a 211-pound slot receiver who I think, old school coach like Pete Carroll is going to look and see the contact and continue to drive and value that. And after all that, I think there's still meat on the bone for JSN. Like I said, he ran 65% of routes in week 13 compared to 81 for both Lockett and Metcalf. So theoretically, Pete Carroll could get those numbers up closer to 81% without even touching Metcalf, Lockett, or Fant. Jake Bobo still ran 9.3% of the routes, actually had an ADOT of -2 yards. So you could just get rid of those right away, or at least pare those back, and we're getting some routes. And then 2 tight end sets. Will Desley and Colby Parkinson combined for 17 routes. 39.5% of the routes are going to the tight end 2 and 3. You scale some of those back, you scale back a little bit of Jake Bobo, and all of a sudden you're getting to a wide receiver 3, close to 81.4%, just like DK Metcalf, just like JSN. You're looking at a 6-6 team playing for a wild card spot in a competitive NFC, and this worked. They scored more points in week 13 than they've scored all season, including going to overtime against the LA Rams. Now, they didn't win, and at the same time, Metcalf is the one that scored those touchdowns, but that's the entire point. You actually had JSN, who was able to make Dallas pay in the short and the intermediate space, which then opens up those deeper routes for DK Metcalf when they start to come in. It's just that Lockett hasn't been as credible of a threat in this year. We've talked about the Seattle wide receivers having the most favorable rest of season schedule. San Francisco this week, Philadelphia, Tennessee. Those are exploitable matchups, if not positive matchups for the entire way through. Last bit of propaganda for you. I thought this was interesting. There was a rookie receiver in 2021 named Amon-Ra St. Brown, who did not see double-digit targets until week 13, which is the same time JSN also saw that explosion in targets. And at the same time, you saw the exact same thing in that game and moving forward, the first read or design plays. Both of them went from about 13 to 15% up into over 30% in the game where these coaches decided, okay, we've seen enough. We want to see what our rookie can do with more opportunity. So I think at this point, they gave him an opportunity. He made the most of it and actually made the offense work. They've got a shot to make the playoffs. I could see moving forward a similar type of run to Amon-Ra's rookie season, where he just consistently saw double-digit targets between then and the end of the season, makes that late season run, and wins a lot of people a lot of leagues and money.
Yeah, no, all great points. And listen, you've been talking about JSN for a while now, right? Hey, when they get their starting tackles back, we're going to get less tight ends. We're going to get more JSN. That happened last week. Got their starting left tackle back. We got more JSN. He's more than doubled his fantasy points per game since week 7, right? 11 points per game since week 7 compared to just 5.4 previously to that. Rookie receiver had an wrist injury at the beginning of the year, started slow. We're kind of waiting for this breakout, and end of the season schedule looks really, really good. My one disappointment, we talked about this off the air, is just I wish you would have capitalized more. I wish you would have made Pete Carroll even more proud by scoring that, holding on to that touchdown, even though he drew the pass interference penalty. He wasn't bad by any means. Just I hate leaving all those fantasy points out there, because then if he scored 30 points, I would be like, we really got to get this guy more involved, even though I do agree with everything that you're saying. Why do we care so much, right? Why are we screaming from the rooftops about JSN? Well, because he's a guy that you probably haven't had in your starting lineups, guys, this entire season, or in and out based on injuries or bye weeks. Now Jack's saying, hey, we might want to force him into our starting lineups now. We've got big money weeks coming up here. You look at guys like Nico Collins, stud, blow up week last week. He's got the Jets this week. He's got Sauce Gardner. He's got some tough matchups. Maybe it's a coin flip between Nico and a guy like JSN. You want to hit JSN before he you want to start him before he has those monster weeks, or else you don't get those points. So Scott asked in the chat, is JSN season coming? Yeah, I think JSN season's here.
Yeah, and I think if you build teams like a lot of people do at the FFWC, and you're taking on not only a good deal of receivers, but storing those rookie wide receivers to the end of the season, like this is the time where maybe you haven't had to flex them, or maybe now that we're through bye weeks, you've got more of your wide receiver options to choose from, and you're JSN or Jaden Reed, like all these kind of borderline cases. And I think all of the indicators for JSN, if you have him and you can work him into your lineup, I would find a way to do it.
For sure. I mean, right now, consensus rankings have JSN around wide receiver 44 for this upcoming week, which has him not in your starting 3. FFWC, you can start up to 5, so he still fits in there. But, receivers ranked ahead of him: Beckham, no. Jacoby Myers, no. Jerry Jeudy, no. Jordan Addison, no. Like, I would start him over all those guys easily, getting him into the top 38 without even looking even further. So, yeah, I think they, it's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow. Like, hey, this is championship week or this is playoff week. Like, is this the week to do it? But great matchup, and probably a game that they're going to have to shoot out with San Francisco, and San Francisco's secondary not as good as you'd think as far as fantasy points given up, to 22nd ranked. So this might be the week, man, where he balls out. And in reference to like his total routes run last week, they lost like an entire drive too, due to Metcalf's like 75-yard touchdown catch, like the very first. So like
right.
if their goal was to come out and feature JSN and their first drive disappears off the field because Metcalf scores that long touchdown, like he might have lost 3 targets on that drive alone. So
exactly.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely some meat on the bone there. I think he is transition. I think Lockett is on his way out. He just looks older and slower, and he's 32. He's undersized. Like, it's time. You're right. He reminds me of Amon-Ra. He also reminds me of Golden Tate, another like Lions heavy duty slot, like running back type of receiver, run after catch. So I'd really like to see him get going for sure. Awesome. Yeah. So moving on here. Thanks for getting that out of the way early. Today we want to talk about our MVPs and busts, fantasy MVPs and busts for this season. We did this probably 6 weeks ago or so, or I did it about 6 weeks ago or so, like mid-season. Now we're in the final season here. Who have been the actual MVPs and busts? And listen, we'll have end of season after the fantasy playoffs. We can do it again, because who got you there, but then who kind of died on you in the fantasy playoffs. Well, here we're going to talk about some MVPs and some busts for this season, basically the regular season of fantasy football. Jack, go ahead. Who is your MVP of the fantasy football season and why?
This may be a bit chalk. I'm sticking to the first round. I'm not getting fancy or cute with it, but my vote for the fantasy MVP of this season is Christian McCaffrey. He was going 4th overall by ADP in our World Championship drafts. So just start real simple. Total fantasy points, he's the RB1 at 297. The RB2 Mostert as 215. So you've got a difference of 81 points between the RB1 and the RB2. And then if you go all the way to RB12, which is Bijan on the season, that's only a difference of 125 points. So really, this is what Christian McCaffrey is doing is what Travis Kelce did for the tight end position last year. He's completely gapping the rest of the field. And if anything, there's some reason to believe that Mostert might slow down a little bit with the rise of Achane again, now that he's coming back. That may, lead to that gap being even bigger. So then you've got the gap of 81.7 points between RB1 and RB2. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 1, and wide receiver 2, Keenan Allen. On the season, there's a gap of 46.5 points. So in these crucial positions, he is almost double the difference between RB1 and RB2 as it is wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. And if you look at quarterbacks, it's so close it doesn't even matter. Josh Allen is only 6 points ahead of QB2 Jalen Hurts. So you got all of that. Then you look at just, obviously his injuries and things like that. So fantasy points per game, 24.8, leads all running backs, 3.2 ahead of second place, Achane. But it's not just fluke. He's not running hot. There's not just some weird variance. He actually has also the highest percentage of team expected fantasy points. He's getting 30.6% of the expected fantasy points each and every week for the entire San Francisco 49ers team. That's 2.2% ahead of even Saquon, who's the second place, who's also just a huge part of that Giants offense. He's getting, second in team targets behind only Kamara. He's third in snaps behind Kyren and Saquon, so he's always out on the field. He's consistently scoring points. And in a running back like a running back field that is just absolutely decimated and underperforming, to be able to gap the entire field like that. I can't think of a more valuable fantasy player from just like a structural positional perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the way that you're kind of valuing that is for the MVP, most valuable is the difference between him and the number 2 running back and all that, comparing it to the quarterbacks and the receivers. And those are all valid points. I'm going to go with a different player. I'm going to go a different route of looking at value. Christian McCaffrey's obviously a stud. And if you took him at the 101, between the 101, 104, or 5, wherever you took him, you're certainly happy and you're satisfied with what you got. But the value that I'm looking at is the value that you might have gotten in drafting this player. And my MVP is RB2, Raheem Mostert, because he was a guy, again, he doesn't have the difference between him is the RB2 overall and the RB3 is only 5 total points. But we're looking at a guy that was being drafted in like the 11th round of drafts. And so I don't have those numbers in front of me, and obviously they're not complete yet, but I can almost guarantee you like the ROI or the pass-through rate or whatever in these tournaments is going to be higher with Raheem Mostert, or as high with Mostert as it's going to be with Christian McCaffrey, because of the value that you were able to draft McCaffrey and Mostert, and there probably are a lot of teams that have McCaffrey and Mostert. So that's where I come in, that's the value that I see. And he's almost been even better. Obviously the fantasy points per game, McCaffrey's at 20 and Mostert's at 16. But if we're talking about like opportunity share, like McCaffrey has much more opportunity share, and Raheem Mostert has one less touchdown, he has 2 more rushing touchdowns, 14 to 12. He's been really, really good. And he's played every single game. Like, honestly, like you could look like even Scott in the chat, but Puka and Kyron, I love Kyron. Kyron's in the same vein to me as Mostert, and Kyron's going to make a lot of people, hopefully us, a lot of people money. But Kyron can't be the MVP right now because he missed freaking 5 weeks. So there's going to be a lot of teams that have Kyron that don't even get through. Whereas Mostert's helping everybody get through. He's at points, 214.4 points, average fantasy points 16.1. Okay. What's even crazier, dude, is Devin Achane. So Kyron Williams is actually number 2 in points per game for running backs at 18.5. Devin Achane is like fourth or 5th at 14.4. Like, you have 2 running backs on the same team in like the top 5.
It's wild
in points per game. It's insane because people think, you talk about this passing game and Tyreek and all the guys. McDaniel comes from the Niners. The Niners want to run the ball first. See Christian McCaffrey but you kind of it doesn't make sense because they have all these passing weapons. They want to build. They want to run first, pass second. That's why you can get away with quarterbacks like Tua. You know what I mean? Because you can run the ball. Mostert's been awesome. He is slowing down a little bit. Had to get the majority of the work in the first half. Lost a little bit to Achane in the second half. But I'm telling you, man, you're starting Mostert down the stretch now. Will he be the playoff MVP? Probably not. Because like you said, Achane's back, Kyron's back, all these other guys are back. But I think as of right now, you look at Raheem Mostert and what he's done for fantasy teams in the 11th round as RB2 and played every week. He's my fantasy MVP.
It is just wild to think about that during the summer you were able to draft Mostert and Achane and even Jeff Wilson where you were, because we were concerned that Dalvin Cook was going to come and take all of the work from these guys. And it's just been the complete opposite. And also, if you would have told me in the summer that Mostert would be healthy and play a complete season, or at least as far as he has up until this point, I don't think any one of us would have seen that coming either. But, it goes to show our assumptions and kind of conventional wisdom on things. When you kind of take the invert of it, that's where there's a lot of opportunity for that upside value like you're talking about.
Yeah, and a lot of guys are like Mike Evans is another great. He's one I consider definitely was up there. I've been on the Mike. I said Mike Evans was a Hall of Famer 4 years ago. Tyreek Hill has CMC vibes, right? First round pick, like head and shoulders above the field. I think Tyreek Hill could be the NFL MVP. Well, listen, Josh Allen's going to win every game here on out. They're going to make the playoffs. He's going to lead the league in everything, and he's going to be the MVP. But, whatever. There's a lot of great players. Corey puts in the chat, JJ's back this week. Obviously not the MVP, but JJ could be the playoff MVP. Think about it. It's going to be tough to get into the 3-week races and the fantasy playoffs with JJ on the team. If you can get in there and then JJ hits, he could be massive for you, because the ownership's going to be so low. So it's really nice getting JJ back into those lineups. So definitely excited about that. All right, moving on to our busts. Talk to me about your bust for the 2023 fantasy regular season so far.
Well, my bust, it's kind of two sides of the same running back coin. CMC being the MVP, and my fantasy bust for the year is Austin Eckler. I'll slightly victory lap here. I didn't look at injuries, kind of like we talked about. If somebody gets injured, like Justin Jefferson, we're not going to hold that against him. But let's look for the 9 games he's played. The 5th overall pick by ADP. He's averaging 14.7 fantasy points a game, which is the RB13. So if you take a look at the 12 running backs ahead of him currently in points, and then combine that with their ADP. 1, CMC, like we talked about in the first round. 2 is HN, which you could easily get at the end of the summer by the 10th round. 3 is Kyron, the 15th round. 4th is Kamara in the 6th round. 5th is Mostert in about the 8th to 9th round by the end of the summer. 6th, ETN in the 4th round. 7th, David Montgomery in the 6th round. 8th is Gibbs in the 3rd round. You've got Saquon at 9, end of the 1st, Rashad White in the 6th, Joe Mixon in the 3rd, and Derrick Henry end of the 2nd round. So the point being, literally any one of those picks is doing far better because you can get better points per game or comparable points per game almost at any point in the draft after Austin Eckler. And then you look at expected fantasy points. So maybe it's a structural change with the new OC or something like that. He's actually 4th overall. He has 17.8 expected fantasy points a week based upon the volume and the workload he's getting. The only 3 running backs with more expected fantasy points a game: Kamara, CMC, and Kyron. So that if you could do subtraction there, the 17.8 expected fantasy points a game, 14.7 actual fantasy points a game. He's scoring a full 3 points each week below his expectation. That's worse than Josh Jacobs, who went in the 3rd round at 2.9 points under. That's worse than Tony Pollard is underperforming. He's 2.9 under expectation, but you could get him in the 2nd round. The only RB that is underperforming their expected points by a greater amount is Alexander Madison, who's a full 4.3 points below expectation. But you didn't have to waste a 1st-round draft pick on him. You could have got him in the 5th round. So to me, the takeaway and the dichotomy between Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, this will be probably even bolder than the JSN take. Everybody, I heard a lot of feedback during the summer about when you'd go with a very wide receiver heavy draft. I would start with 4 or 5, a lot of times even 6 straight wide receivers. Well, can't you find like a running back in that area that's worth it? I think at least so far this season is pointing out that the RB dead zone this season started in the 1st round after Christian McCaffrey. Every single one of those running backs afterwards is replaceable by running backs rounds later. And Austin Eckler being the priciest dead zone running back on the list has to be the biggest bust.
Yeah, I completely agree.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, Mahomes. There's so many busts. And again, we tried to avoid the injuries because there's been so many injuries. Like how do you hold an injury against a guy? But no, I mean Eckler was even hurt too for a couple of weeks. But even when he's played, he has not been good. He was a guy that I was avoiding. I don't think I have like any Eckler where it matters. I might have him in a couple of super flex leagues because again, you get him in the 4th round of a super flex or whatever, like the 3rd round, and you're kind of building rosters differently. But yeah, I completely agree there. Running backs, especially in an injury-heavy year, you know it's going to affect running backs a ton. And so, I mean, even with my MVP Mostert, a guy that you could have gotten in the 11th round, there's a it goes on and on and on the list of running backs you could have had instead of Eckler. He was a guy I was off of too because of his size. Like he's just kind of an undersized. I get he's jacked, but like he's older and he's undersized, and he's like eventually new offensive coordinator. Just too many question marks for that. And the crazy thing is like he's kind of like his run out, other than the injury where he was out a few weeks, has been really pure as far as like injuries to other positions. Like he should be catching 9 balls a game with the situation that's going on there right now. I mean, Quentin Johnston stinks. Mike Williams is hurt. Gerald Everett's never on the field. He's splitting time. Like he should be catching 7, 8, 9 balls a game, and he just isn't. So it doesn't even make sense.
I don't know. I don't know if it's the age cliff. He was a hard fade for me in the offseason. I would not draft him in the first round, regardless of where I could get him. And, for me, the offensive coordinator uncertainty. I thought Joe Lombardi, it keeps things close to the line of scrimmage. Maybe there's some Kellen Moore pushing it downfield, pushes it away from Austin Eckler. I wasn't sure about. He saw quite a boom in production when Keenan Allen went down last season. So I thought with Keenan Allen back, how would that affect him? But I don't think I was even necessarily thinking it was going to be this bad when I decided to fade him. I didn't see it playing out like this, especially if you would have told me Big Mike, Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, Gerald Everett, like everyone ahead other than Keenan Allen was just going to collapse. You would assume that Austin Eckler would keep driving that offense, and he's just really taken a step back.
Yeah. And he's not even passing the eye test anymore. I mean, sometimes he just looks really slow. So, but yeah. Okay, moving on to mine. And I struggled with this because, listen, there's a lot of injuries.
You've been disappointed a lot?
Yeah, I'm disappointed a lot, man. It's just a lot of injuries out there, and a lot of players that were disappointing. And so I was trying to pick a player that wasn't really hurt, wasn't affected by injury. This player that I picked, he was probably my highest drafted receiver, most shares. In fact, I even forced you to draft him in a draft that we did together. And he was affected by injury, but not injury to him. And I will say, Scott's going to kill me. I will say that I own this jersey, by the way. I bought this jersey this year. I always do that. I got the Gibbs jersey. I buy players that I'm high. I got the Kyle Pitts jersey from a couple of years ago. The players that I believe in for fantasy, I buy their jerseys. I rock them out all year. And that's Garrett Wilson is my boss. Now, I might surprise some people because he hasn't been like awful. Right, because he hasn't been hurt. On a fantasy full season basis, he's wide receiver 23. Now he was being drafted as like wide receiver 6. Even in some drafts, he was going as high as like wide receiver 3 or 4, like towards the end there, because people really, really wanted him. And I will say this: if Rodgers played this season, Garrett Wilson was going to absolutely smash. I mean, if you just look at the underlying 34.4% of the target share. 34.4%, and he's wide receiver 23. If he was getting 34% of Aaron Rodgers, you'd have Devontae Adams. That's wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 type numbers when Devontae Adams was with him. So he was going to absolutely smash. Next season, I'm right back on Garrett Wilson, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or something like, I'm right back there again with Garrett Wilson. But this year, to have the metrics, the numbers that he's been healthy, right? He's had 34.4%, 120 targets. Okay, 120 targets. The next closest guy ahead of him with over 120 targets is Michael Pittman, all the way up at wide receiver 11 at 127 targets. All right, he has Gardner Minshew as his quarterback. Gardner Minshew's not good, but Pittman has found a way to get to wide receiver 11 and a 35% to target share. So, it's just, I get it. The quarterback situation there has been hideous. They're never in scoring range. He's incredible and he does it all. But from a fantasy perspective, you take him as wide receiver 5 and he ends up wide receiver 23 and he played every game. That is a bust, unfortunately. So, and again, I could have done this with a couple players. I could have done it with Jalen Waddle, even though he missed a game. I could have done it with a bunch of different T. Higgins, even though he missed games. Like there's just a bunch of guys that even when they've played have not hit. So again, Garrett Wilson's a tough one, man, because I got playout teams with Garrett Wilson on it. Like, do I want to start this guy if I've got, I probably am because of the target share, but some of the matchups are tough. And I can, in these 3-week races, Jack, you got to have spike weeks from all these guys. Garrett Wilson is not, there is not a 30-point week in his bag right now with the quarterback play. There just isn't. And there are 30-point weeks in, you could scroll out. Gabe Davis has 30-point weeks in there, and he's way down below him. Zay Flowers has 30-point weeks in there. Heck, Jaden Reed right now with Watson out has a higher ceiling than Garrett Wilson. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be really tough down the stretch for me when I'm playing for $150,000 in some of these races, $50,000 in the mid stakes. Like, it's going to be hard to start him, but it's also going to be hard to take him out of my lineup.
And I think that's exactly why, it reminds me of the Twitter conversation you were talking about throughout the season of, is it better to have the really big injury come early on or, later in the season after you've gotten some production out of them? Similar to that, is it better for a player that you invested high draft capital in to get injured early on, so you have to make accommodations around them and work out your team a different way, or be like an Austin Eckler or a Garrett Wilson who's giving you some, they're playing, they're out there, they're getting enough to justify continuing to start them, but they just kind of slowly tank your season the whole way through, or tank the playoffs because you lack that upside. They're kind of the silent killers of these teams. Whereas sometimes you just rather know, okay, I can't plan around him. Justin Jefferson, when he's out, I know he's out and I can make other plans.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's like Wilson is usually getting there. He's usually getting you to 13 to 15, which is great for the regular season and getting those wins. You have that nice floor or whatever. But by the way, it takes an act of God a lot of times to get him to the 15, but he gets there because he's so freaking good. But it's like, man, when I'm chasing all this money, can I start him, man? There's a lot of guys with a much higher ceiling, and those are the ceilings that you got to hit to win that big money. So it'll be interesting to see what people are going to do with him and what I'm even going to do with him moving forward with some of these roster decisions. But yeah, a lot of guys in the chat, Daily Double says Judy, totally get it. Mahomes, we talked about that earlier. Mahomes is absolutely a bust. He's been like quarterback 21 the last like 4 or 5 weeks. Like, he's not been what everyone hoped he would be. And you know what? I draft on a lot of different sites, and FFWC, man, the players here were sharp with the quarterbacks. I mean, quarterbacks lasted longer at the FFWC than they did anywhere else in fantasy football. So you were able to build a roster and still get Mahomes in like the 6th. So he doesn't really kill you. Even Josh Allen, who was going as the QB1, was going in the 5th round. I mean, I think we have a world championship team where we got him in the 5th and Diggs in maybe the 2nd or something like that. But or first, sorry. So it's like there's a lot of ways to build around quarterbacks, and FFWC players were really sharp by kind of waiting on those quarterbacks for sure. So hopefully people weren't killed. Like Mahomes in the 6th or 5th, you're not dead. In fact, I've got a couple teams that are through with Mahomes. You take Mahomes in the 2nd, like they were doing on some of these other sites, like it kills your team, kills your roster. So interesting stuff there. And no, I absolutely love a lot of the comments there in the draft for sure. Pitts, another one. Pitts needs to get out of there, or they need to get a new quarterback, or they got to get rid of the coach. So many options there. But all right, moving on to some players for usage and stuff like that. We're going to start with a guy that I had a lot of going into this season, a player that's been a bust, kind of definitely on the field, and was injured a lot going into it. That's Deontay Johnson, wide receiver for the Steelers. He's a guy that hasn't been what we've hoped for, but maybe there's a rainbow here, right? After the storm. Jared Smola tweets out yesterday that Deontay Johnson out-targeted George Pickens 43-17 in Mitch Trubisky's 4 full games last season. Now, I get George Pickens was a rookie. George Pickens has been a little bit better this year, but he hasn't been a ton better. He's still hit and miss. He's still running a lot of those wind sprints. But I think if this transition to Trubisky via injury, if it's going to be that 4-1 or 3.5-1, I like Deontay Johnson moving forward as a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, and when you told me that one, I was kind of thinking it through myself, and the thing that caused me to pump the brakes at first was, well, maybe Trubisky might favor Deontay Johnson, but, with Matt Canada gone, the game plan has seemed to be, running a whole lot more over expectation, over where you'd assume they would, kind of trying to protect the quarterback. So maybe the overall target share, the target pie shrinks a little bit. And that's kind of where Deontay Johnson lives. And that's certainly possible. But then I've also seen Najee Harris popping up as a DMP with a knee issue. So, they might not have that luxury. They like to be able to split those rushing attempts pretty evenly between him and Jaylen Warren. They don't seem comfortable fully turning it over to Jaylen Warren. So if he's not performing at what they think is well enough to get by and give him the full workload, they may not be able to lean into the run like they've tried to since they got rid of Canada. So, yeah, there's a clear preference, and it's hard to ignore. It's not just a particular game, but over a 4-game span, that stark of a preference. There's something about what Deontay Johnson does in his game that just makes it easier for Mitch to find him.
Yeah, I think he's just a much better route runner. He gets open. Like, quarterbacks kind of trust those guys. His hands, he's had some suspect hands over the years, but yeah, I think he's a guy, again, wide receiver 3, nothing special, but I think he's a guy that can probably compete with Garrett Wilson going down the stretch here for fantasy points, which isn't really saying much. All right, moving on to a guy that we had thought we had turned the corner with this guy like a month ago, and here we are back talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, another guy whose jersey that I own. He's his lowest snap share. That's right, the curse. The lowest snap share since week 4, 46%. Lowest rushing share, 27%, and route participation at 54%. So I know they got out to that big lead against the Saints, which is a David Montgomery type thing, but it's also, again, I think they're still rotating series. And so from what I gathered, like even watching early on in that game, the first series was David Montgomery's series. I think Montgomery had 4, 5, 6 plays in a row. And then eventually, you get winded. He comes out for one play. Gibbs goes in, carries it for 40 yards down to the 5-yard line, and then comes right off the field, and Montgomery goes right back in, and Montgomery scores because it was Montgomery's drive. So it's like if whoever has the longer drives is going to get more fantasy points or get more usage. I know it sucks, but unfortunately, in some of these money weeks here, you're going to have to deal with some of these 7 to 8 point weeks from Jahmyr Gibbs, whereas he's got those 28, 29 point weeks in him. So I still think you're starting him. Obviously, you just have to realize that he does still have that very low floor, depending on game script and what they're doing on those particular drives.
Yeah, I think you hit it, especially there right at the end with game script. I mean, there's going to be not only the week-to-week volatility of whose drive do the touchdowns happen on. So if that consolidates into one of them, then obviously that's going to be a disparate result week to week. But the Lions get out to that early lead. I think they passed only 25 times the entire game. So not only did that show just a commitment to the run, they got out ahead. They must have seen something in their game planning that they liked running on the Saints. And once they're ahead, they can comfortably do it and just burn away the clock. But also that those fewer pass attempts mean fewer targets for Jahmyr Gibbs, which is part of the lifeblood of what he does, is getting those targets. He didn't have a single target last week. So that's just a part of his game that was completely gone. And when you have the kind of production variability when you're alternating drives and you're getting rid of pass attempts because you want to run the ball more and not targeting those running backs, those are just – there are going to be certain game scripts that even if he happens to get a particularly good drive, he's just going to be constrained in his upside. But then there's going to be those ones where everything hits right, and he's exactly who you needed to win that week.
Yeah, dude. He could score from anywhere on the field. He's so good. This offense is that's the problem, too. This offense is so loaded. Like, Montgomery's, good. So it's like he's efficient. He's exactly what they want him to be. Then you've got Amon-Ra. You've got the tight end. You've got Jameson Wood. It's not even like they can do, okay, we need an end around with an explosive player. We got to go to Gibbs. They have Jameson Williams, who takes that end around and jumps from the 25-yard line, it seemed like, into the end zone and hurdles in. It was
fast.
So fast. Their team is a great offensive line. I think their center, Frank Ragnow, has an injury, which doesn't look great for like a David Montgomery type player, but line is good. Dome games the rest of the season. I think they've got the Vikings dome games. So those, listen, they're going to be good. I'm still starting Gibbs, but it just stinks.
It reminds me a lot of the 49ers offense. If like you split Christian McCaffrey into like a traditional running back and a pass catching back, but there's just they're moving well, but they've got the strong tight end, they've got speed at the receivers, they've got a physical receiver. Like it's one of those offenses where it's going to score and score well, but some weeks it's just going to consolidate into certain players and not others. Especially so when you split the running back into two.
Exactly. All right, moving on here. What do we got here? Chris Olave. So he's a guy that we've been excited about. I have a lot of Chris Olave, and a guy that we've been group chats, all that type of stuff, been talking about like, hey, and not even group chat, everyone in the world wants Jameis Winston at quarterback. Mm-hmm. We don't want obviously Carr to get hurt, but if he gets hurt, hey, give us Jameis Winston. Gets that injury on Sunday. Winston comes in slinging it again. He's just a fun player to watch, a fun dude to listen to. He's a quirky kind of guy, gunslinger. What does it look like for Olave here moving forward? Hopefully with Jameis Winston at quarterback.
Well, you shouted him out earlier, so we'll shout him out twice. Jared Smola on Twitter. A lot of good stuff, so definitely a good follow. Yeah. Jameis Winston has targeted Chris Olave this year. He's thrown 47 passes. Chris Olave has been the target on 38% of them. So we're dealing with a smaller sample size, 47 total passes, but there's a preference, and it kind of fits what we know both about Jameis Winston and what we saw from Chris Olave in his rookie year. Just a lot of high air yard, pass it down the field, just put it up there in a place for him to go get it and make that magic. And Jameis Winston just doesn't have that inhibition that maybe like a Mitch Trubisky, who's going to wait to see Deontay Johnson get open before he passes in the ball. Right. Jameis is willing to YOLO it and see if he can get into the end zone. And for our purposes, if Chris Olave doesn't catch it, we don't lose points. So it's only an upside game with those pitches down the field. And beyond, it's beyond the Jameis Winston upside. We were starting to see some a connection with Derek Carr before he went down in that game. He had a total of 8 targets, 5 for 119. And, part of that is because the Saints have kind of turned into the Chargers. They lost Michael Thomas, Raheem Shaheed. We don't know the situation there. They were running A.T. Perry and Lynn Bowden. So if Chris Olave didn't lead the league in lead the team in targets, we'd be worried. But I think either way, the Saints have reached the point in the season where they need to win now in order to make the playoffs. They're now behind Atlanta, and they don't have a better weapon downfield. There's not a better deep threat. There's no, you've got Kamara and Taysom who can maybe compete for the short area targets. There's not a better downfield threat currently available, especially until Shaheed gets back. So for all of those YOLO balls, whoever they're coming from, I think we're going to see the Chris Olave that we were drafting in the second round, or at least that we thought we were.
Exactly. And that's a good point. Olave right now, wide receiver 16 on the season. And yeah, like this is the opportunity. He's got all the receivers hurt around him. Let's get a quarterback in there that's going to sling him the ball. 27% target share. That could go up to 40. Like while he's the only one there, and Winston is the quarterback. He hasn't even had as bad of a year as you would think. Wide receiver 16. He only has 3 touchdowns on the season, which is tied with one other receiver as the lowest touchdowns for a receiver in the top 23 fantasy receivers. You know who he's tied with, Jack?
Who's that?
Garrett Wilson. lowest touchdown, 3 receivers. I just noticed that. I didn't have that written down.
There you go.
But Garrett Wilson, hey, Scott, love him. Listen, Scott says enough slander. He's going to have 100 yards and touchdowns. We guaranteed. I would love that because I've got so much and get Garrett Wilson. But hey, 2 Ohio State buddies, 2 Ohio State receivers here, Olave and Wilson. Hopefully they can both smash down the stretch here. But That's it, man. Anything else? Anything else you want to harp on? You want to talk about? Listen, lot less waivers to go through tonight. Plus, you don't have any money left from all the teams that I'm looking at.
I think on one of my leagues I have $1 because I have to get a quarterback to fill in for Kyler Murray, and I waited till this week. So Tommy DeVito, here we come.
Tommy DeVito for the win. Listen, we had to get Tommy DeVito's name out there before we ended this stream. But thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Great show as usual. We'll be back next week talking about playoffs coming up for fantasy, talking about those kind of who can we put in our starting lineups, who should we get for the 3-week race, for the sprints, for the 4-week races, the 5-week races here to make that 150K here at the FFWC and a lot of other tournaments they have going on. Jack and I have a team in the top 10. I got a couple of mid stakes, circa Las Vegas fantasy teams that are competing. So hopefully can win some cash there too. And we will see everybody next week. Good luck this weekend.
Have a good night.